Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on affordable housing, a key platform for economic mobility. My name is Janet Viveros, and I am the Acting Director of Research at the National Housing Conference. Joining me today on this webinar are Doug Ryan of the Corporation for Enterprise Development, more commonly known as CFED, Lot Diaz of the National Council of La Raza, and Cy Richardson of the National Urban League. These panelists will expand upon the discussion that took place in December 2016 at the How Housing Matters Conference, which was hosted by the National Housing Conference in partnership with the Urban Institute, Urban Land Institute, and HUD PD&R. Today, the panelists will explore key housing and economic mobility collaborations and discuss how they have demonstrated the effectiveness of this cross-sector work and ways to alter the narrative to gain more support in the current political climate. I'd like to thank Capital One for sponsoring NHC's webinar series. Any opinions or errors, however, are ours alone. For those of you who don't know the National Housing Conference, NHC educates decision makers and the public about housing policies and practices to move housing forward together. NHC convenes and collaborates with our diverse membership and the broader housing and community development sectors to advance our policy, research, and communications initiatives to effect positive change at the federal, state, and local levels. Now, before we get started with today's webinar, I have a few more final notes. First, let's cover our most frequently asked question. Is this webinar being recorded? Yes. An archived copy of the webinar will be made available. We will send a link out to everyone who registered once the recording is online. We strive to provide the recording and resources within 48 hours of the webinar when possible. Second, please note that all participant lines are muted in order to ensure clear sound quality for everyone. However, we will be taking questions. If you have a question at any time during the webinar, please submit it through the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. That's the box I've outlined in red here in the screenshot. We'll answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of the webinar. Finally, let's address technical difficulties. While we hope the webinar runs smoothly for everyone, we all know that this doesn't always happen. If you run into technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Help menu at the top of the GoToWebinar control panel to locate technical support. If that does not work, please visit the GoToWebinar support website, which is support.citrixonline.com. Today's webinar, as I mentioned, is an opportunity to resume the conversation that was started at the December 2016 How Housing Matters Conference on the intersection of affordable housing and economic mobility. And our panelists today will really resume where we left off. But to refresh those who attended the conference as well as those who were not able to, the key themes that arose from this December conversation really started with the importance of creating resident-directed processes for programming that really put control in the hands of residents versus a top-down approach where some programs tell residents what they should be striving for and how they should pursue their goals. So it's really important to give control back to the individual and the community and let them determine their own financial goals. Another key element that arose in the conversation is the importance of utilizing existing individual and community assets. Instead of seeing individuals and neighborhoods as purely places and people with needs, it's important to think about and identify the strengths that these people and places have and how these strengths can be used to pursue their goals. Conference attendees also discussed the need for better systems and incentives alignment so that opportunities to increase working hours or wages wouldn't come at the cost of residents losing housing supports and other supports. Another key issue that was discussed is the need for affordable housing providers to revisit their screening procedures that often bar individuals with criminal convictions from filling units, often in the name of public safety. However, this often overlooks the nuance in an individual's situation, as well as the timing of when they receive their criminal conviction and their ability to be a responsible resident now. It creates a barrier not only for them to access affordable housing, but also takes away the stability in many cases that's needed to pursue jobs and services and other things that will promote their economic security and mobility. And finally, more needs to be done to change the narrative around affordable housing and supporting individuals as they pursue their economic goals. As I mentioned before, oftentimes discussion revolves around the need, and really we need to move into a discussion that resonates more widely with individuals about the importance of supporting individuals in low-income communities and households because it's a benefit to everyone in America. So with that, we're going to continue the conversation, and I'm going to hand the baton over to Doug. Doug Ryan is the Director of Affordable Homeownership at the Corporation for Enterprise Development. Doug?
GSEs, that means meeting their affordable housing goals, as well as their duties to serve underserved markets, such as rural, housing preservation, and manufactured housing. So as advocates, as practitioners, and those interested and committed to economic mobility, we need to continue to press on these goals, on the affordable housing goals of the GSEs, their duty to serve, so that that they are successful in getting credit to underserved communities and communities of color informs any proposed reform that comes up for discussion in the next couple years. It's unlikely, of course, that housing finance reform gets done this year, but it is likely it's going to be considered in the various congressional committees, and all of us need to be sure that we're part of that conversation. So why this conversation matters? Well, it matters because stable and sustainable housing, both ownership and rental, facilitate financial security. Rental housing stability, through adequately funded rental assistance programs as well as good market rate options, these can lead to home ownership, the key source of wealth building in the United States. Good rental options can lead to financial stability, good credit, improving credit, help people build savings and build down payments, help connect people with services and other programs that can get them into housing counseling, down payment assistance programs and the like, which you'll hear about more. This is why housing stability is just part of the equation as we get towards home ownership. And that should be our goal. Stable housing choices that allow qualified families access to credit, home ownership, and the positives that flow from it. It's interesting that in some markets across the country, in different parts of the country, home ownership can actually be cheaper than renting. And with that, we need to be able to figure out how to broaden the credit box to ensure that families that can and want to own, now that of course doesn't mean everyone, but those families that can and want to own can in fact purchase a home that meets their needs. We seem to have moved away from that goal, and I think it will only hurt us socially, economic, and frankly, it will hurt us for generations. To facilitate economic mobility, homeownership is a big player. I think that we all know that home equity can help cover business startups, education, and other investments. We also know that white families, for example, rely on intergenerational wealth transfers to help pay for that first home. And frankly, that's one reason why African American families become homeowners 8 to 10 years later than white families. And with that 8 to 10 year delay, that aggravates the ability of a family to weather downturns in housing markets and other economic crises. That's why it's so important to get people who can be homeowners to become homeowners when they want to and when they're able to be. We also know that homeownership can lead to better educational outcomes and lower crime rates in certain communities. We know that. There's evidence of that. No doubt this is due to stability and community efficacy. Now that said, I want to touch on another part of housing stability and economic mobility. While homeownership can help reduce crime, and there's evidence to show that, so can housing the formerly incarcerated. The research is clear. Housing instability and shelter use lead to increased crime and recidivism rates among the recently released from prison. This makes sense, of course. getting work, getting services, including health and treatment services, is a whole lot easier when you have stable housing. Consider that 12% of American men have a felony conviction and that 25% of African American men have one. Consider that there are between 70 and 90 million criminal records online with varying levels of accessibility. And I'm talking arrests as well as convictions. But these can influence people's economic options, from housing to work to education and everything else in between. So how do we move forward? Well, the Federal Interagency Reentry Council has done good work on this, and their summer 2016 report is valuable. I suggest that people take a look at it if you're interested in it. It covers much more than housing, of course, but it does underscore how holistically we have to approach this challenge. Also, over the last couple of years, HUD has done some good work. In 2015, HUD released guidance on the requirement that assisted housing providers not exclude applicants simply due to arrests or minor convictions. In 2016, HUD released additional guidance on the fair housing implications of such decisions. It is fundamental that the Trump administration continue and expand this work if they want to bring economic opportunity, reduce crime, and other benefits from the programs that we know work to communities nationwide. As we need to reclaim the narrative on home ownership, we also need to reclaim the narrative on crime and those people leaving prison. Consider this. Consider a 2016 survey of crime victims, and that they noted by a ratio of 7-to-1, victims in the survey favored mental health services over prison. By a ratio of 10-to-1, crime victims favored job creation over prisons. And by a ratio of 15-to-1, these individuals favored education over prisons. And again, without stable housing, none of those other areas are likely. You can't get access to services, to jobs, and to job interviews, and to education, to other services without stable housing. We have largely embraced, I hope anyway, housing first to address homelessness. We know that that works and has clear benefits. I think we need a housing first model for the formerly incarcerated. We need to reconnect folks leaving prison with community services, the communities that they care about, and the supports that come with it. You know, as an example, some states offer certificates to prisoners who are released who have met certain requirements to re-enter the workforce. These certificates offer to employers reduced liability and other assurances that these individuals are ready to join the workforce. I think we could do something similar for people who need to re-enter the housing and the housing market. Some states, frankly, in the housing area have made real progress. Utah comes to note, as have some other states, but I still think we can make a lot more progress, and the federal government could assert even more leadership in this area. So as I've said throughout this discussion, there are narratives that we need to reclaim, but fundamentally the narrative is this: housing stability, whether if it's home ownership or rental, is fundamental to the well-being economically, socially, and otherwise for the nation. We need to reclaim these narratives, put forward the solutions that work, and embrace these opportunities that are in front of us. So with that, I look forward to questions from the audience and the participants. And Janet, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Doug. At this point, I'm going to turn the mic over to Lot. Lot?
Yes, thanks, Janet. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak specifically about one element of mobility, and that is empowering the individual to be a more effective actor in the marketplace. And my background, NCR's background in this, really stems from our housing counseling work over the past 19 years, which really focuses, when you think about it, for a home buyer or anybody addressing a housing issue, it's a matter of matching information and support through the decision-making process. And we also noticed in our portfolios, particularly our home ownership portfolios, which many were not ready for home ownership, that process of improving their credit and income situations to become eligible along the way had a lot to do with how they were managing their finances and decisions in those areas. So we eventually glommed on to this area, which we initially, it's financial counseling. We referred to it as financial counseling. And as time goes on, we hired an individual, her name's Kate Rios, to kind of lead some of this work for us. And we finally came around to this concept that that many of us and others are calling financial capability. And for us, it's a term that includes several service lines that collectively work to assist a family better control their financial security. These services generally include financial knowledge or skills training, which is typically done in a classroom setting, one-on-one setting, or self-paced online education programs. It also includes counseling or coaching assistance to support program participants that are involved. And this is usually attached to other programs that the family's participating, whether it's a housing savings program or there could be a whole variety of these things. And access, and the final thing we think is crucial is access support of financial products that foster getting control of their financial security and integrate individuals into lower cost banking services or accessing affordable credit products. So when we say financial capability, we're really talking about the interplay of those three components. Typically most organizations currently apply financial education, and it's usually in tandem with other programs. Most commonly we've seen is with housing counseling, workforce development, plan savings programs like individual development accounts, or I've even seen services that are funded under HUD's self-sufficiency program. And so they're generally in tandem, and they're an appropriate load to support the family's progress through another service as they are getting another service. In many ways, the programs, social programs, whether workforce, housing, health, even education, are applied everywhere. That the impact of financial capability can really affect the outcomes of those. And in fact, we believe it's most critical to embed them than only simply as a standalone approach. The approach of integrating financial capability into existing programs we've seen there's several examples where it's shown to improve outcomes for families participating in the programs. So for instance, there's an example of a health program with low-income mothers in Nebraska recently that came out that integrated financial education into their services, and the result were the participants with the financial education reported better outcomes in nutrition, physical well-being than those who did not. And I'm sure that has to do some way with the life factors that are associated with that kind of education. Other studies are out there, not meant to be a compendium, but just to name a few that we've noticed. And the Urban Institute did a study that covered two financial capability programs in a random control trial, and the result of the participations of those programs were improvement in savings in terms of amount and frequency, reductions in use of alternative financial services, improved perceptions of control over financial issues among participants, improved sense of financial well-being by program participants. So there's evidence that the intervention has impact on how people are managing money and some financial decisions. Other studies have indicated that linking together various financial capability services, like you combine education with a product access or a savings program, results in clients being able to three to four times more likely to achieve positive economic outcome than if just one of the service was provided on their own. And just to give a more intimate example, we have a housing affiliate here who recently did a pilot where they had 78 families in a cohort that they were getting financial capability services in addition to addressing housing needs. And over the course of the project, 78 of these, over the course of the project, 78 families saved just over $1,000 on average and reduced total debt significantly. So again, we're seeing there's a fair amount of evidence by providing that intervention, good things can happen. The last my final point as we're ending is that for us, we've been working in the space. It's really the work that we're currently doing, and I'm going to review just quickly a model that we've done that kind of brings out some of the issues that are confronted in financial capability generally. We have been working in this space for the last 3 years and experimenting with several affiliate models that we've developed collaboratively and during these models have collectively served 1,000 individuals with financial capability services. The aim that we're trying to do now is to improve the economics of delivering this service, as well as identify strategies to improve adoption by our affiliates and used more by community members. The result we're trying to get is what will be a connector of services to our affiliates connector organizations that serve populations of financial insecurities and connect them to affiliates who really have the capacity and adaptive financial coaching to serve them. The model begins with kind of the capacity we've developed through our housing counseling work, which is essentially a network model, but is linking now in education, health, and workforce organizations to join the work. This pilot is going to be, we'll engage 20 organizations in different segments, reach 40,000 people, and then eventually with education services, and 2,500 with coaching. We believe that the financial capability to be effective, it needs to focus on a couple issues now before it's going to be a self-sustaining service. First, I mentioned the cost of service is a critical factor. Like other services, funding for these kinds of services is shrinking, and financial capability doesn't have a large constituency in the private sector, like say mortgage, banks who are supporting rental housing and the like. So addressing that is kind of a critical factor. The model itself, the model itself is really one where case managers and local agencies are trained to provide level 1 support to encourage clients to more deeply focus on financial issues. Those clients who choose that will then refer to a call center that goes to a second level that really targets specific goals and sets up a one-on-one counseling event with one of the many financial coaches in our network. And then the financial coaches are the ones that are going to work with the family over the 12 months to obtain short-term goals and build confidence achieving longer-term goals. The reason that's important is because finding funding to train staff, to place staff, is not an easy issue, as many of you know. And although the benefits and interest of providing that service amongst agencies is high, so finding an alternative model to kind of combine things in a way where more are served is really a major point of what we're trying to do with the work. And then lastly, I want to conclude and just with a couple of that I mentioned it briefly before, but I think what we are focusing a lot in making sure that individuals who are getting financial capability services, either through our or any other partner agency, they have access to good financial products locally. So what kind of financial products are we talking about? Well, small installment loans, which are used broadly to as stopgap measures on emergencies that come up, debit cards, credit cards, in some cases, But we want to begin to connect this service to delivering to products that are doing that in the highest quality and the safest way for consumers, because there's one cohort that our model would not necessarily address, and that is those who are not in the social service system in some sort, and who interact with this strictly on the basis of products. You know, I need to get a short-term loan, I need to do something at a pawn shop, I need to get a debit card for a program that I'm part of. And so our hope is eventually to kind of find a way to interact with the product delivery as well, to essentially do things, progress the family or inform the individual of how you can plan and use services to end up at a lower cost, either in a bank or a credit union or some other provider where their costs are lower in general. The whole effort, all these things, is really to empower the individual to use systems most effectively, and again, the question of how do you do it at scale and how do you do it leveraging everybody's expertise is something we've been trying to solve. And with that, Janet, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Lot. And Lot is the Vice President for Housing and Community Development at the National Council of La Raza. Thank you for filling us in on some of the work that La Raza is doing. Next, we're going to hear from Cy Richardson. Cy is the Senior Vice President for Economics and the Housing Programs at the National Urban League. Cy?
Great. Thanks very much, Janet, and thanks to you and to Doug and Lot. You had me at hello, as they say, Doug and Lot. I had my lighter up the whole time while both of you were talking. I do think I think you framed well kind of your various perspectives on the broad issue and then specifically what you're doing, Lot. So thanks very much to all of you. Just to be clear, though the National Urban League is 107 years old and exists in many regards to advance the permanent interests of African Americans, to push for their further embeddedness in the social and economic mainstream, we also contribute to the broader national discourse and discussion around the boosts and blocks to intergenerational wealth building in all aspects of American society. And as part of this articulation, we employ various frames to elevate and heighten awareness of the prevailing issues at play. And for us, in the second decade of the 21st century, a prevailing civil rights issue is that of wealth inequality. And I'm going to use my time on the call to take us up to about 20,000 feet or so to remind and recall some of the overarching contextual pieces that sometimes get overlooked within the affordable housing as economic mobility driver conversation. And so for me, it's really the specter of widening wealth inequality and how systems work, in fact, to immobilize large segments of the population that is kind of germane to this broader conversation. So really, kind of the impacts of wealth inequality are far-reaching, clearly, and contradict, for us, the core American values of equal opportunity, hard work, and upward mobility. And while the wealthiest families accumulate disproportionate benefits from the expanding economy, millions of families at the middle and bottom of the economic ladder are living in a state of perpetual financial insecurity, to use the term du jour. These families are surviving on a day-to-day level, but they cannot cope with a financial emergency or save for the future. In fact, almost all of American households, you know this data point, and 2 out of 3 households of color do not possess sufficient savings to sustain themselves for a minimum of 3 months if their income were disrupted. And 1/3 of African Americans and Latinos do not own any financial assets. A stark data point. Addressing wealth inequality and enabling lower income families and families of color to build financial security, long a matter of social justice and morality for us, is now really an economic imperative. Indeed, it's what modern day civil rights is. In case there was any doubt, I believe this must be said, and I hope others on the call will concur with this statement as well. But at any rate, it gives you a glimpse into what drives me and my organization. So just to build on this for a second, as the nation hurtles toward its multiracial, multicultural future and fate, both the opportunity and the capability for most of its citizens to be able to build intergenerational wealth through home ownership hangs in the balance. And to be honest, I'm rather bearish on the whole situation. Coming through the great unpleasantness, we've really learned some important lessons and had to work to dispel some fairly entrenched myths. And Doug has walked us through some of those already. We've had to dispel the myth that LMI folks and people of color are too risky from a credit and mortgage pricing standpoint. I mean, this particular myth seems destined to be an albatross of sorts for decades to come as the one supposed truly incontrovertible fact peddled by our friends in the banking world. The true lessons learned are far more provocative to contemplate, and we've learned two big ones. First, and my main point here, is we cannot disregard and be blind to the various systems and institutions within civil society which work in an aggregate way against the social and economic interests of poor people and disadvantaged communities. I mean, come on, folks. We know operating in this space are predatory and unscrupulous actors, many of these driven by just sheer greed and so forth. Let's understand that and call it out for what it is. And second, serving individuals and households with multiple barriers, structural or otherwise, requires a degree of holism in programming and commitment to organizational change that's often alluded to, but is rarely incorporated in any meaningful way at the client level of engagement. In this argument, I nod heavily to our colleagues at the Great Bay Area outfit PolicyLink, Lisa Robinson and Chris Brown, the researchers who authored what I think to be a seminal report last year titled Breaking the Cycle from Poverty to Financial Security for All. In it, it offers a well-informed framing of some of the societal systems, the everyday structural barriers that drive inequality that I mentioned. There's a YouTube video of a recent webinar on this paper for those keen to learn more about their framing. But at any rate, they argue that we must ensure that the broader systems with which all families interact, right, serve to build rather than erode their financial security. They suggest that the key step to building financial security is fixing policies and practices within the financial, education, health, justice, and tax systems that perpetuate financial insecurity and deepen poverty. We can and must reverse the impacts of these systemic inequalities, and with the knowledge, experience, and they point out the tools already exist to make this a reality. Over the past couple of decades, the asset building field has forged significant and innovative approaches to promote economic mobility among lower income households. It has developed and tested a variety of strategies and public policies that help struggling families save, invest, and preserve financial assets. Yet in the face of the widening racial wealth gap, there is a tremendous and urgent need to bring these efforts to scale, as Lott suggested, by embedding financial security approaches into the larger systems that affect the household budgets of low-income people of color. An integrated systems approach to building financial security, Brown and Robinson argue, is key to developing broad economic inclusion, mobility, and ultimately financial security for all. I do direct you to their work to better understand the theory of change at play and to review some of their examples from the field and to peruse the register of thoughtful state and federal policy recommendations they offer. The second lesson or point I want to make relates to the first in a way. And that is that service integration can eliminate barriers and place struggling families on the path to stability and prosperity. Incorporating a clear and consistent focus on building financial security into pre-existing programs serving lower-income communities has already begun and is yielding promising results. In a sense, it's a case of old wine in a new bottle, in the sense that social service providers and the broader social work movement have for decades argued and worked to provide multiple services to households with multiple challenges or barriers. What I'm talking about is a rearticulation of sorts of bundled service provision in a way that better empowers the client. For example, affiliates of my agency, the Urban League around the country, are helping low-income renters improve their credit scores and enter the financial mainstream, integrating financial education into school curricula, community health agencies and services, and workforce development programs, and helping parents and students in struggling communities budget for college and successfully navigate financial aid options. As multi-service organizations with workforce and financial education and counseling, many of you on the line have a unique opportunity to deepen the work you already do more effectively and to rebuild and stabilize families and communities. Urban League affiliates across the country have been focused on the most persistent and significant problem of long-term unemployment, helping thousands get jobs often for the first time or the first time in many years, and are helping the lowest income workers build skills and experience for career development. The Urban League Housing Counseling Departments have been working with families interested in home ownership or struggling to keep their homes, providing financial counseling and education to help them build knowledge and skills in financial management. To better help households bridge the income and wealth divide and effectively rebuild their financial lives, the National Urban League developed a new model for building family financial capability, the Financial Empowerment Centers, as we unsexily call them. These centers integrate across the workforce and housing counseling divisions to provide financial coaching and education, as Lot pointed out, income support screenings and workforce coaching and education to help families develop goals and action plans to increase their income, financial resources, and acumen to start to build wealth. We just completed the pilot testing phase of these financial empowerment centers, and the intermediate outcomes are through the roof. I've become a real evangelist for this model and design. So most organizations that successfully implement this model are building on services already in place, so the primary focus should be on the integration of those services. The integrative model is critical to the success of a financial empowerment center model, but the transition from siloed programs to a model that crosses departments is challenging. The approach of integrating across workforce and housing counseling operations has been very effective, as the workforce development departments provide the primary client flow and critical workforce development staff and resources, and the housing counseling departments provide trained staff experienced in financial counseling and education. This synergy is essential for success, but it does take work. Because of the deep level of need and extent of crises in our communities, Urban League affiliates have been overrun with clients and needs while also experiencing diminishing resources. And related to that, there's no tougher population to serve than the cohorts of ex-offenders returning to society. But in our judgment and experience, the hardest populations to serve also offer myriad opportunities to innovate new integrated service delivery techniques and programmatic pairings. In our approach, client triage is followed by in-depth discussion of options and short-term case management involving coordination of needed services, which may include housing location assistance, job training, job placement and retention services, legal assistance, literacy skills development, GED courses, parenting classes, life skills training, access to basic food and shelter resources, and other forms of support. And while these types of supports are not new, I mean, social workers and parole officers have perfected the kind of suite of services approach for more than a generation. It is precisely the timing and sequencing of the triage that matters most, as well as other customized methods. We do have a data system as well that tracks and aggregates our work in this space. Though like many of you on the line, we grapple with the need to have all of our data and client management systems to be able to interact and talk to one another, and we have yet to find the holy grail of the solution. In that, I mean, there's one that's halfway affordable as well. So to achieve all of these goals, major shifts in policy and practice are needed, requiring sustained advocacy and diverse leadership that spans sectors and issues. Advocates have a key role to play in working with policymakers at the local, state, and national levels to ensure that the promising strategies and practices highlighted in these ideas and the ideas of the other presenters on this webinar are institutionalized. Support for lower-income households to build savings, meet financial goals, and fully participate in economic life should become standard practice throughout the systems that affect us all. And in my view, to actively ignore or disregard these civil rights imperatives is not something a modern industrialized society should be proud of. So I'll get off my soapbox there and look forward to the Q&A. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Cy, and thank you again to Doug and Lot as well. This is the part of the program where all of you in the audience get to ask questions about what you've heard and questions that you've brought to the webinar in advance. The first thing that I'm seeing is a request from a few folks, Lot, that you provide a link to the study that you mentioned about better physical well-being and nutrition with the Integrated Financial Capability Program. So what we can do is I can get that link from Lot and I will share it in our webinar follow-up with everyone. And then we also have a question that came in that I think ties in well with where you left off, Cy, about this issue of systemic inequality. And the question arises about really asks for speakers to comment on the use of housing choice vouchers as a social mobility tool. Not all low and moderate income families will become homeowners, but we know from the long-term follow-up to the Moving to Opportunity experiment that outcomes including health and education moving to low poverty neighborhoods has big effects on families' long-term mobility outcomes, including income, health, and education. And so I think this really ties into this idea of There are constraints on access to opportunity depending on where low-income families live, whether they have access to quality education through quality schools, whether they have access to services, transportation to jobs, and things like that. And this is a real tension that we struggle with in the housing community in terms of providing access to opportunity. It takes longer to do community development work to create opportunities than it does to provide immediate housing mobility solutions. So I'm going to offer that up to all of our panelists to comment on housing choice voucher use or housing mobility as an economic mobility tool.
Yeah, this is Doug. I can jump in real quick if that works. My thoughts, I don't think they're much different than a lot of people who think about this stuff. Is that obviously, they're inadequate. They're not adequately funded. The voucher program is not adequately funded, and there are concerns right now about where that's going to go. But more than that, I think there needs to be rethinking of the mobility aspect of vouchers. For example, I do think we need to be much more aggressive in the portability aspect of the vouchers. Housing authorities, if not merging, but having a regional approaches to this, so portability or mobility is more effective. Those kinds of things. People should be able to more easily connect with work opportunities or educational opportunities or family connections when they have a voucher. I do think we can do a much better job on that. And finally, source of income laws. If we don't have source of income laws, in the communities where people want to live, vouchers will not be particularly effective, and we know that. We know the data support the value of source of income protections for families with vouchers and other assisted housing supports.
And this is Cy. Just to add to Doug's point, which I agree. I mean, I do think vouchers are an important element in what a progressive place-based community development strategy should be. And again, the appropriate balance between uplifting places while shoring up the ability of people to reach their own financial and economic destinies. The appropriate balance needs to be able to deal with both. And so the balance around portability, mobility, but also benefits to places, right, through civic engagement and local participatory engagement, I think also needs to be understood to help people develop that kind of rootedness which communities benefit from. So again, I'm hoping the new folks with the regime change at HUD have developed sensibilities around that appropriate balance, but I do agree, housing vouchers and the ability to use them as drivers for economic mobility and progression, it's an important tool in the toolbox.
Great, thank you. We've had some more requests come in for links to studies that our speakers have referenced in their comments, so I will certainly follow up with our speakers after the webinar, and we can send out those links as well. There's also been some interest in some of the work that you've cited, so we'll get that to folks on the webinar and connect you to some of the resources that are available not only on the websites of our speakers, but other resources that they think would be of value. We did have a question come in that asks, are there any creative solutions to helping clients increase their earning potential? Job training programs are popular, but most clients have low-paying jobs. They cannot afford to take off 6 weeks for training opportunities. So I'm going to turn this back to our panelists to ask, what are you doing to incorporate some of these job training services and integrated services into a model that works for working folks, and specifically, how do you work with them to increase their earnings or access higher paying jobs?
Hi, this is Lon. I'll just start out on that. The approach that we have used in collaboration with our affiliates is really around a job training model, and it's hard to earn more income unless you reposition yourself in the workforce. And so, for instance, nursing has been a big driver of that. In some cases, some of these are in some cities have been sector specific. Nursing is probably the biggest one we did in Chicago with a few affiliates, and the essential progression of that, it was like after evenings program, weekends programs, taking them through various levels of basic skill development, and then feeding them slowly into community college training programs that many of them ended up in certification over time. So our general approach has been really sector-oriented programs. So in some communities they can vary, but the idea of taking basic skills training, pairing it up with higher skills training, and a job path after that. So that has been where we've been successful. That has been the approach we've taken.
And Lot, do you have any strategies for offering these training programs to folks that are unable to take off time to pursue training? Are there opportunities that folks are able to fit into their existing work schedules, or is this something that you're still exploring?
Yeah, no. These programs have been done. They're catered to after work or hours where now they're not necessarily catered to every individual, no matter what their schedule. But like there'd be evening classes, for instance. There'd be weekend classes. But at some, there's to the degree that it had flexibility, it was probably more that worked within the normal workday, and had some weekends free, because the training had to happen at some point, and if they were going to work, it had to be in off times. So I'm not sure. I don't think it was super flexible, but I mean they were kind of grafted with the sense that someone was going to have to be working, or they couldn't participate at all because of family. They have to support families and such.
Great, thank you. We have another question that asks whether anything is being done on a congressional level regarding post-incarceration homeownership or economic possibilities. So are any of your organizations working on particularly serving individuals with exiting the criminal justice system in terms of your congressional advocacy efforts?
This is Cy. Yes, I think that's sometimes a voiceless constituency, and one that's kind of difficult to articulate within the kind of current kind of cost-benefit analysis around how legislation is proffered and assessed. But I do think kind of to on-ramp folks back into the various kind of positive systems of society. I think we're obligated, our broader sector is obligated to do that. And all of us are obligated to ensure that kind of seamless reintegration and all the kind of supports that are required. But yes, we're partnering right now with the Kauffman Foundation on an interesting initiative, an interesting design, which is essentially acknowledging, or our argument is acknowledging that folks who are returning or who are semi-permanently locked out of many systems that I mentioned, but primarily the prime workforce development system. And so we're looking at, is entrepreneurship, is kind of small business formation and development and expansion a likely and viable pathway for folks who may be talented with business instincts and sensibilities and may have applied those while they were incarcerated. But to what degree can we accelerate their reintroduction by building on those strengths and interests, while also having a pool of funds available to help folks take their business idea to the next level. So entrepreneurship as a viable alternative to some of to the traditional pathways.
Great, thank you. And then we have another question I believe is directed towards Cy, but definitely Lot and Doug, if you have any thoughts. Are there some client data management systems that you would recommend? And I assume this is really in the context of integrating data about various different services and programs and really trying to integrate the data as well as integrate the service offerings.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say we spent a lot of time on this, and I think there are others on the phone who I can in turn learn from. But really, the best kind of customized chassis for us to do the integrated work and understand what's happening at a service delivery level, at a client level, and also to be able to aggregate and disaggregate data is the suite of client management systems offered by Efforts to Outcomes. I think that's the system that was initially endorsed by both LISC and the Annie Casey Foundation around the original design for the Center for Working Families. And again, I think they've mastered the kind of data interaction and created that kind of Rosetta Stone to help other systems speak with one another. It's been the best data management tool for us, efforts to outcomes.
And the only thing I'll add is that it's all complicated and it varies depending on where you're starting, but efforts to outcomes is a good one.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to just close out the webinar with one final question, which is, as briefly as possible, whether our panelists could give us a sense of how can we talk about this work in a way that resonates in this current political environment. Everyone on the webinar buys into the belief that this is important and that this work makes a difference not only at the individual level but as well as the community level. But how do we speak to those who might not see that, and how can we really make the case that this work has value to every American?
So this is Cy. I'll give you my 2 cents on that. One thing I would say, and this is, I'm putting kind of my praxis into practice here, is the first thing we have to do is understand that we're working within a broader ecosystem and we should not easily be cleaved off from one another or kind of detached from one another. I do think in this kind of hyper era of kind of special interests and identity politics, everyone wants to have us seen as, these are the African American groups, here are the Latino groups, here's the LGBTQ groups, the folks who are interested in tax credits, the community land trust people, the affordable housing people, housing policy people. All of us are part of an important and rich stew and pastiche. And I think we would do well to understand that it's not a black homeownership problem or a homeownership problem in communities of color. White America needs to be able to tap into the equity in their homes to do whatever they want to do, right? To be able to go, retire to Boca, to finance their kids' education or their daughter's wedding. They need to be able to sell their homes to younger, possibly households of color. That's how this marketplace works. So for this to just be a minority homeownership problem disregards or is blind to the fact that the selling and purchasing of homes has an incredible role in our macro economy and microeconomies at the local level. I am concerned about hyper-segregation in some parts of the country, but still, at the end of the day, kind of broad stream America needs to be able to tap into the equity in their homes in an intergenerational way. And I think we would do well to say we have an important role in greasing those kinds of transactions.
Yeah, this is Doug real quick. I think that's a very important point, and just to underscore that, I mean, the more people we have qualified and able to buy homes, the more all of our homes are worth, and the more equity and assets we're building, and the more communities become wealthier and can move towards other investments and other educational opportunities. We have a real crisis right now among the next generation of home buyers. We're at risk of losing that generation, and that would be a fundamental undercutting of our economic mobility and our economic future for this country. And that's why all of us should be concerned about that.
Any final thoughts, Lot?
Yeah, I think our approach is trying to connect it to, the kind of just the economic growth of the country. Having any segments fall as far behind as this happened currently is not helping the economy, and it's definitely not helping society. But I think the major angle, and at least some of the arguments we make, in addition, I mean, all the others presented were well stated, is really just focusing on the economic balance within the country and the importance of broad growth for the betterment of not only just individuals, but of companies in the U.S. as well.
Thank you. I would like to thank all of our panelists, Doug, Lot, and Cy, for their insights and their thoughts, as well as sharing their work with us all today. And I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for attending and posing some great questions. And thanks again to Capital One for its financial support of NHC's webinar series. With the help of Capital One, NHC holds webinars on a regular basis on a variety of housing policy and research topics. And with that, I will close out this webinar. And as I mentioned before, I will be following up in the next few days, sending out a recording of the webinar as well as the resources mentioned by our panelists so that you can all take a closer look at the work that they're doing. Thank you all so much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.